Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Corporate and Strategic Committee meeting held on the 4th of September. There were 3 recommendations that have come through to Council for a decision. Those relate to the confirmation of the meeting timetable for the remainder of 2013 and a proposed timetable for 2014. A recommendation to the incoming council around the committee structure of this council, and similarly a recommendation around the current code of conduct for the incoming council. There were five reports were received at the Corporate and Strategic Committee meeting, and one of those the bottom one became a decision of council at that meeting. That's all, thank you.
Have you got the wording of that resolution?
In the minutes. It's in
the minutes? Yeah, okay. So if anyone's got any, perhaps there may be a discussion around that. Councillor Curtin.
So you're going to that very point, the urgency around that. I just wondered, not being present at that meeting, can Ms Lambert say what the urgency was, and is it still urgent now?
The issue was that council needed a confirmation of whether or not this is to proceed by the 30th of September. That had been a previous resolution of this council. So the information came from the Sports Park Trust to this meeting on the 4th of September. A recommendation was made, or a series of recommendations were made in the officers' report that were discussed and debated and passed. The decision to make those a decision of council was made on the day by committee members.
Mr Chair, given that in my calendar the 25th comes before the 30th of September, I'm curious to know what the urgency was and why we'd overturn a long-standing council prerogative to debate these issues twice, instead choosing a preemptive strike like this.
I don't think I'm in a position, Councillor, to answer that.
Councillor Dick, you moved that from memory?
Mr Chairman, through you, I actually moved it, and the motivation for doing so was that the support, if it's to proceed, is highly conditional, but I felt that it was fair to the Sports Park Trust and others involved to give them an assurance that things would happen if the conditions could be met, and that they would have a reasonable amount of time to make sure that they could comply with those conditions. Whether that happens or not is over to their endeavours, of course.
Sorry, Councillor, could I follow a supplementary to that? Have we had any indication of whether the conditions are going to be met?
No, there's been no formal contact with the Sports Park Trust since then.
Just follow up a question with regard to the report in the minutes that the Hawke's Bay Artificial Surf Trust had verbally indicated their support but had not provided that in writing. Has that been received in writing?
No.
Does no one else find that extraordinary? We've got a comment there from a key protagonist and a condition on the original motion of council, and yet we've proceeded without that and without any subsequent confirmation.
Councillor Gilbertson.
Can I answer that, Mr Chairman, seeing he's asked any other question? Oh, I thought he said, is there any other question? Find that extraordinary? No.
Mr Chairman, I just want to, the questions that Councillor Curtin were asking were exactly what I was wanting to be updated on, because this is our last opportunity to find out where we stand with the conditions precedent of that motion. And I would like some assurance from the staff that there were still 2 conditions built into that approval, and that was on the total support from the other bodies that we had actually requested that information from, and secondly, the clear commitment by New Zealand Hockey to actually host regularly a national tournament. So I want some assurance that both those conditions have to be met.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the first of those, under 2.1 in the minutes on page 97, requires that there's confirmation in writing of an international hockey event with a minimum commitment from the appropriate sanctioning body, which in this case will be the International Hockey Federation, of 5 years. My understanding is that Hockey New Zealand are meeting to determine that this Friday, so that's the 27th of September. And then the second is confirmation in writing of full agreement reached between the Regional Sports Park Trust, the events consortium that's going to be underwriting the event, and Hockey New Zealand, and that is still a requirement, and that neither of those have yet been met.
Can I then follow up, Mr. Chair? Will we be handing the money over without those obligations being met? No. So if they're not met, there is no alternative for the Sports Park Trust in terms of a local turf that we would fund. It would be the $2 million is uncommitted, remains then uncommitted by this council.
Excuse me, any other questions? Councillor Bremswell.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. At that meeting, one of the matters which was discussed was the issue of cadmium, and Mrs. Lambert said that that was being monitored currently, but there's no more about that. Once it's being monitored by the council, will it be coming back to this council and be reported upon?
It'll be part of our standard environment reporting program, yes.
So that will come back to this table as a separate item?
No, it'll be part of a state of the environment report that we are required to complete by the end of this current financial year, 5-yearly report.
Well, Mr. Chair, can I actually ask that that monitoring comes back to committee so it can be actually looked at and discussed by this committee?
Well, this is a council meeting, but it will come back to a committee. Absolutely, it always does.
Specifically, the issue of cadmium.
It will be addressed specifically, correct.
I thought Mrs. Lambert
Well,
just said that
specifically
it would be
addressed as part of a State of the Environment report.
Yeah, I understand that, Mr. Chair, but I'm actually asking that the particular issue of cadmium comes back to this council as an item.
Well, it will do as part of that report. Any other questions? Councillor Douglas.
Mr. Chairman, going back to the hockey and dealing with the minute on 97, I know we're not dealing with that, but it pertains. I understood the 30th of September was still a magic number somewhere in all of this, and it's not in any of the resolutions. Am I wrong on the 30th of September?
This council resolved as part of its annual plan decisions to require a proposal to be decided upon by council by the 30th of September. So that was our timeline in terms of a formal date. But you're correct in a sense in that if this Tier 1 facility is to be built in time for a tournament next year, it has to be started by the 1st of October. So I think that's that's its own driver. It doesn't necessarily have to be in this. If these conditions aren't met by the 30th of September, then it won't be going ahead then.
Then I wonder if the subsequent question then is, should we somehow be noting that they've set that deadline themselves? Because this could be going on for 5 years, and we've already had this drift quite a bit of time. Now, my question is, should somehow that have been in there? Because it was in my mind, and I must admit I didn't. I actually moved the resolution. I actually understood, perhaps, but I didn't specifically require it. That October the 1st, I agree, that was the date. That's why we saw urgency. Otherwise, it may not be as urgent. You know, the same test does not follow. So I'm wondering if that should have been in there. And the second question then is, if it is not, or seeing it as not, how do we actually remedy that if it is a thing we should be doing?
Councillor Rose.
Just to be helpful, try to be helpful, Mr. Chairman. I was speaking with Mayor Yule just a few days ago, and he seemed quite definite in his mind of the date of the 31st of September. He said if the ball was very much in their court, and if those conditions hadn't been met by then, well, you know, we were back to point start again. So there didn't seem to be any concern with him that it was a movable date.
Well, it was implicit on the original decision, absolutely.
But as I said, Mr. Chairman, you'd need a special resolution now because it has been moved, passed by council, so
Well,
we would need it.
It's covered. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, presumably there'll be some email or some form of communication on the 30th of September. Don't leave it till the 31st. Otherwise, we may never, ever know anything.
There will be, my understanding, I'll let you answer this, but you'd actually like to cite the documents, wouldn't that be fair?
I think that's a requirement that we have confirmation in writing and cite the documents as part of this decision-making process.
Mr. Chairman, it really comes round to the point of what is stated explicitly and what is stated implicitly. And it certainly was stated in our original resolution that agreement in writing from all parties. So I would actually suggest that that implicitly still remains, and that we need to hear from all the players in this area that were had around which the original identification that funding was consulted on. So that needs something in writing from the Artificial Turfs Trust as well.
I haven't seen anything in writing from them, but I'm not sure whether the Trust may have a document. They haven't communicated that.
Well, we had the fact that there was to be one, and it hasn't been received. So,
and if it hasn't been received, it's yet again. They haven't met the requirements. Happy to move? No other questions? You happy to move? Happy to second? You wish to speak? Councillor Gilbertson.
Briefly on the action, the committee structure for the next council. I'm just very disappointed that we haven't recommended that there be a finance committee or an audit committee. I've been saying that for 6 years, and it astonishes me that we take global warming with so little seriousness, and that we don't have having $500 million worth of assets and a $44 million budget. We just say to the staff, here you go, boys, and that's about it, to be realistic. So I hope the new council addresses that, but apart from that, it's all good stuff.
Seconder.
Mr. Chairman, I support the recommendations that were made, and after much discussion in the council, I hope that all councillors will continue to take a very thorough look at all the financials that are put in front of them, which are quite intensive workshops followed by quite intensive examination in council and in the corporate and strategic committee, and that no councillor should ever think that you telling the staff just go away and do it, boy. Anyone who stands on that premise will have a sad awakening.
Other speakers? Councillor Curtin.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I've just got a few comments to make about the process that the committee made in coming to its sports park decision around the hockey turf. I go away for a few minutes, and that's what you do, and I come back, you pass these ridiculous resolutions. Heaven help you for the next 3 years. No, I shouldn't be facetious like that. Mr. Chairman, it does concern me that this huge opportunity we have provided to one sports body in Hawke's Bay, a really good sports body, but fractured at present and still remaining fractured. Part of the rationale in getting the parties together was that Hawke's Bay had strong, resilient organisations running its sports delivery, and on top of that, the infrastructure needed to carry those sports was concerted, rational and reasonable. That is, we've got limited resources in the region, applying them for one, having more facilities than we need simply is not an option for Hawke's Bay, and yet here we have a resolution in course of travel which supersedes that notion. My concern is, in the absence of support from the Hawke's Bay Artificial Turf that indicates their support, we're not complying with the requirement. I'm concerned that we've got a potential start date for the project at the sports park on the 1st of October. There's no way that could proceed on that basis in time. So it really concerns me that this regional council has made a decision like this without ensuring that all those ducks were in a row. They're clearly not in a row. We've been led along the pathway here for years on this proposal, and I can't see that we've got enough to go on, that in 5 days' time the bulldozer is going to be out there doing the business that's needed to deliver $2 million worth of this council's spend. I would say that there are probably equal, if not more deserving, sports entities in Hawke's Bay which could show a concertedness and unanimity that we would expect if we're handing over that sort of money. And I just refer, for example, to the denial or refusal of this council to support the softball fraternity in Hawke's Bay to the tune of about $10,000, doing wonderful work, and yet that entity was turned down. They would have given us more bangs for bucks than having one hockey turf in Napier and another one in Hastings, and still continued fractured and fragmented sports facilities in the region.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas.
Mr Chairman, I understand Councillor Curtin's points, and partly because he wasn't here, but we were thoroughly assured that if the button was pressed on October the 1st, the facility would be ready by March or April. I can't remember what the magic date was, but very quickly. And they have a lot of design work done. So unless we've been misled, and that would be a worry, I believe that that was the case, that they could do it. What I'm proposing is, when we come to the minute, is to seek to get the minute amended, because I don't think the minute is now complete. I won't say it's inaccurate, because I think we did have a date of either the 30th April or the 30th of September or the 1st of October, consistent with what we were asked, and that was the intention. So I'd like to make that explicit when we come to the minute. But I believe the intention was quite clear of the council to proceed with that at that stage. So I support it to that extent.
Can I raise a point of order, Mr Chair? Mr Chair, if we're going to resolve to accept the recommendations of the committee, are we then going to go back and change that minute? What can you give us a process for that?
No, we're not. Well, we haven't